you're all very welcome to Maynooth and to the Social Sciences Institute. I'm Seán Foghlú, and together with my colleague Professor Mark Boyle, we're running a series of seminars just talking generally about a range of issues and linking research underway with policy making and touching into different aspects of that. And we have a very interesting seminar for everybody this morning, and we've been joined by Chiara Loda from the Department of Further and Higher Education Research, Innovation and Science, and by Professor Brian Donnellan from Maynooth, from the School of Business in Maynooth, who is also on part-time secondment to the department. And we're going to talk with them about the work that Brian is doing with the department, but we're going to do that in a little while, because Brian is also going to talk really about, I suppose, aspects of innovation and networking and impact and engagement first. And we're going to just have a bit of an open discussion about that, and then we'll move into the secondment. And just to give a bit more of an introduction to Brian, Brian has had a really interesting career. He started off as a civil servant, and he's just telling us there about working in a minister's office a wee while ago. He was 20 years in industry, and he's been about a long time in higher education as well. And now you're going back to the future again, so you're working with Dee Ferris in that regard. And he's somebody that myself and Mark have worked with a good bit, and he's a really interesting way of coming at things, a really diverse background and culture and hurling and all these things. But he just challenges in a really interesting way and comes at things a different way, and is really open to. So he's a great person to be engaged with, to get ideas from, and then to have an engagement about the ideas. So in that spirit, Brian is going to take us through some reflections on impact and engagement. Thanks, Brian.
Well, thanks very much, Seán. It's a very generous introduction. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to share some reflections, some experiences I've had in industry and also in academia. You may have noticed I'm not exactly a spring chicken, right? So I've been around the block a bit and made lots of mistakes along the way. I've had some good successes as well. But my motivation really for participating in the fellowship and do this work generally is to see where I can help. You know, if I can help people avoid some of the pitfalls, some of the challenges that I've seen in my time, then I think I'll have made some modest contribution to what we're doing here. Anyway, so what I'm going to do now is take a stand back from this whole impact and engagement topic and maybe think about it a little bit more holistically and just share some thoughts with you. And this is one man's view of the world. It's surfacing, I suppose, or unpacking maybe some of these buzzwords and reflecting my experience in the area. So first thing I'm going to say is, might be stating the obvious, but different things matter in different domains. So we all go to work in the morning, and we all do three things. Usually we're working with ideas. We're trying to make those ideas, put them into practice, and then we're hoping that they will have some impact. So no matter where you are, you usually engage in those three different things. Now, in academia, what counts as a good idea obviously has to do with issues like novelty, with timing, intellectual heft and significance. That's what good looks like in academia. When we're executing in academia, usually we're organized around a principal investigator. We're looking for research rigor. We're looking for publication output. And in terms of impact, academics are whether we like it or not, there are really a lot of emphasis on citations, although that's changing with new initiatives like DORA and QUARA. You may have heard it. And you're looking for impact in your own discipline and across cognitive disciplines. So that's the kind of currency, if you like, we have in academia. Go in industry, Well, what does good look like there? What's a good idea? A good idea tends to have novelty, it tends to have feasibility. Actually, I will stand up because I'm looking back too much. The idea has to be feasible, and in industry, you're worried about IP and such. Execution is usually around a matrix organization, unless it's a very small SME, and criticality of time is the key issue. And impact, what does good look like here? It looks like scale, it looks like a business model, commercialization, and business partners in the business ecosystem in which you find yourself. Policy, what does good look like? And my colleagues can keep me honest here, but I think in policy, you want to be evidence-based, you want a political sponsor, it has to be strategically framed. Execution is often around the departmental structure, consultative, it should be transparent, and then the impact of society. So, 3 different currencies. And they can be orthogonally, both vectors can be orthogonally related at times. So is it any wonder that this is not a trivial task to work across different domains and work across different sectors? It's because the fundamentals here, the real driving functions can be quite different. So that's the first thing I'll say is that as we think about collaboration and engagement and interdisciplinarity, cross-disciplinarity, this type of work, we should bear in mind that there are different metrics at play. So it's also a different journey. So if we think of the engagement project as starting at the beginning where you identify potentially interesting organizations to work with, and you go through the sequence of working with that organization, building relationships, all of that stuff, and then finally demonstrating the benefits of that collaboration. That journey can look very different depending on the stage of your career. So if you're a very early career researcher, it might be quite a difficult thing to pick up the phone to senior industry figures and try to establish contact or try to understand where the intervention needs to be made and who you need to talk to. So sometimes I think that the engagement topic is treated somewhat like a homogeneous challenge. We work with somebody outside the university, but journeys can be very different. And the levels of difficulty can be very difficult as well, depending on the stage of the engagement process that you're on and who you're. Oh, sorry. Where you are in this journey in terms of are you at the very early stages of engagement? Are you trying to close off? So it might be if you're doing a project on long-term effects of government policy, that may take years, many years to reach some kind of conclusion. If you're working for a company and they need results by the end of the quarter in 2 months' time, that's a different dynamic, right? A different set of people play. So I think it's helpful sometimes to maybe unpack or surface what's going on behind the scenes in terms of these types of engagements. There is a process, and that process can look different depending on the end state and the engagement partner. Also, intensity, the intensity of the relationship can vary dramatically. You can have a really tightly coupled, very synergistic, maybe is the word, relationship with I call it the customer or the end user of the end organization here, or it can be quite an arm's length relationship, depending on what you want to get out of it and what both sides agree to in terms of joint expectations. So I don't think we think enough or perhaps talk enough about research intensity and collaboration intensity. I think it's important. I'm not going to bore you by reading down through the different categories here, but you get the idea, right? Different types of mechanisms, different types of protocols, different types of communication systems, depending on how intense that relationship is going to be. So I'm an engineer, so went by training, so I do tend to think in terms of, well, how can we map this? Can we, if we look at a portfolio of research projects, is there a way of looking at that portfolio and looking at the balance of the portfolio? And so sometimes I think in terms of this type of model where you're working with people, working for people, or working about people, and trying to understand where in that continuum you are, and in particular, if you've got a portfolio of projects, what's the mix like, and what are the expectations like? Because there's a lot of implications of where you find yourself in this map. So I sometimes suggest to students or research groups that they should perhaps be more self-aware about what their project portfolio is in terms of this type of engagement intensity. A topic that's gaining a lot of traction, well, it's always been important, but the whole question of ethics and transparency and how the academy conducts its business, so to speak, in collaboration with external organizations, that's it's always been important, but it's seems to be getting a heightened importance recently. And I've just come from a meeting this morning, discussions around whether researchers should be working with Israeli researchers or Chinese researchers, or what are the protocols there, and how do we look at the overall in the round, look at how to behave in a responsible manner in terms of our engagement practices and research practices. There aren't that many principles out there, actually. I know here in Ireland we've done a lot of work in this area, and colleagues in Campus Engage have done a lot of work around this topic, and people here in the university in the research ethics group have done a lot of work. But nationally, I haven't found a lot of sets of principles and guidelines and kind of thoughtful approaches to this. I like this one. The Danish University Association had a thoughtful, I thought it was a thoughtful approach to this. So I thought it was pretty interesting. But I think this is a topic that's not going away anytime soon, and it just seems to be, as I said, getting a bit more traction, and it has an impact in terms of how we train our researchers to engage, how we conduct business as a university. Sometimes I think we're a little bit contradictory. We encourage researchers to work with or to accept opportunities to work internationally, and we say, yeah, go for it. It's good for your CV, good for your career, and then subsequently we can turn around and say, you did what with who? Mm-hmm. So there's a little bit of inconsistency there, perhaps. Okay, so those are some comments on engagement, and my takeaway points would be that it's not an homogeneous activity. There's lots of different approaches you need to think about, and perhaps a more granular approach, and then a more self-aware and maybe a systematic approach would be helpful. Okay, we're going to make some comments about impact. So this has become a bit of a hot topic as well in the last year or so. I don't know if you've been following the debate in the press. So we had economists coming out saying, "Oh, universities are not delivering in terms of economic growth," and then we had a series of publications in Nature saying, "Oh, we've got 15 million researchers in the world. What the hell? What are all these guys doing? Are they making a difference?" And they went through 45 million papers, and they crunched numbers and so on. So it was a bit provocative. Of course, when I went back and read the original research paper is interesting and much more nuanced than in The Economist or Nature, actually. The original research is pointing to a problem of impact not just being at the door of the universities, but one of the big problems is the lack of absorptive capacity of companies. So the inability of companies to be able to absorb all the good ideas, all the good people, that was a real impediment. So it's a little bit more nuanced than nature or the economists are saying, but still, it still persists. There is a malaise. There is a conversation going on constantly around how's our research impacting. And again, when I looked at the original research that was done in Duke University on this, they didn't take account of a whole load of underlying factors that are important here. The impact of research team on research output can be significant. You know, in the software engineering world, we talk about big teams develop, small teams disrupt. And so there's a dynamic here that needs to be understood. Also, it depends on what definition of innovation and creativity you take. The paper is in Nature took a very fairly simplistic view of what research is and what innovation is. We know from Pasteur's quadrant that there can be many different. There's a whole spectrum of different types of innovation. So the other topic that comes up a lot is why don't you just be interdisciplinary and that would be great. You'll have a big impact if you be more interdisciplinary. And we encourage. Back when I was working in administration in university, we certainly tended to try to foster this idea. But of course, the reality is something different for the researchers on the ground. As universities, we're kind of organized in a way that doesn't help. The grant agencies aren't always optimized for interdisciplinarity, journals, conferences. So there's a whole subsystem structure that doesn't necessarily make it easy to be interdisciplinary. The other feature that you sometimes may hear of is the expert's dilemma. So the more you move away from your core discipline area, and the more your deep expertise gets eroded over time, the less credible you are, actually, frankly, among your disciplinary colleagues, and you lose. By eroding that competence, you can do some significant damage to your career. So what you want almost is kind of Renaissance person who has enough deep competence in the discipline area and also enough transversal abilities to be able to bridge the gap between their discipline and others. And that's very hard. That's not a trivial thing. So easy to promote or to suggest this interdisciplinarity or transdisciplinarity is a good thing. Not so easy to make it work in practice. So what's going on? There have been some efforts to try to characterize the evolution of universities in the space of how the nature of impact and the nature of their role is changing over time. This is one approach from the Dutch, where they see universities morphing from kind of becoming centers and monolithic structures with a physical location, more trusted partners, creating innovation spaces, discussion spaces like this, where people can in a very confident way, in a very trusted way, be open and frank and talk about where the pain points are and do so in a very frank way. So this work comes out of research we commissioned in the European University Alliance, the Innovation Expert Group, where we looked at how the nature of university impact and the nature of universities themselves are changing over time. And these are kind of parameters that we were seeing as time moved on. So the last point I'll make is that I now working with my colleagues, Chiara and others in the Evidence for Policy unit, and it's great. It's really enjoyable. There's in the ideal world, we would have all the data we want of a high quality, and we would take that data and we cluster it and we make it thematic become information, and then we would use that information to solve problems so that we have knowledge, and then that knowledge would be the basis for evidence. That would be great. The reality is different. We don't have the data. We don't have all the data we want. It's not of the right quality, and information suffers as a result. And so you get this constant interdependence between the different types of different layers. You get feedback loops. You get a very messy environment. So that's the world as I see it in evidence for policy. It's not the more purest view of things that perhaps I might have had in years gone by. So I saw this the other day where somebody was explaining the process, that an academic was explaining the process by which he arrived at the conclusion. And then in the middle, then a miracle occurs, and you get this whole, we need, when we think about these type of evidence for policy environments, we need to make sure that we understand causal relationships, correlation relationships, and be careful that what we produce at the end of the day is practicable and systemic and usable. Okay, so that was it was a conversation stopper. That's all I'm going to say on that one. Yeah.
Okay, I hope that's not people thinking and reflecting, which is the aim. I find it really interesting to have these different ideas and different models and to reflect on how they all sort of interact with each other and kind of maybe fundamentally question some assumptions that we all have, I think, which is what a lot of this work is really, really good about. But also it's pretty fundamental for the development of society at the moment, and the societal changes nationally and internationally underway that we're talking about, and how research can have that impact. And some of those issues, like observative capacity, doesn't just apply to industry. And I think that what in trying to create this research for policy connection, we can't have everybody buying into departments, and how do they get to the right? So how do we organize that? Also, that expert's dilemma of moving too far. And I think what I immediately thought was COVID. So you'd have some really good experts in areas, but sometimes they'd be going quite a bit off. But it was helpful for societal understanding, but then people were interpreting sometimes what they're saying as being more definitive than what they were saying when they were actually in their area of expertise. And that's a really helpful input to the discussion. I want to open it up. If anybody has any comments or questions, anybody want to come in? Here, I'll give you this. Right, introduce yourself.
So hi everyone. I'm Keith Moynes. I'm an official in the Department of Further and Higher Education. That was fascinating, Brian. Really lots, and there's actually loads of questions I'd want to ask, but I'll restrict myself to one. Actually, I'm really interested in that sort of the different conceptions of the university in this environment and what it's there for. And I think in Ireland we have a reasonably sophisticated view of the role of the university, and we don't actually go in for the binary stuff. But the conception internally in the university of what's valued, and you sort of reference there the sort of the Renaissance person, and you reference what gets you promoted in the institution. So in my world, people come to me and say, why don't they just get out of the, don't be focused on citations and things like that. And there's very good reasons why why you focus on citations. How does that dialogue happen within the university about impact and the balance between, that outward facing and the sort of the impact within academic life? And particularly, is there argument internally within the universities around what's valued for promotion, for whatever the incentives are, that sort of moves you closer to impact for industry, for policy making, all of that. Just interested in your reflections on that.
Okay, that's what we could have an entire seminar on that, Keith, but it's a really good question. The challenge can be around, if you're not careful, you get what you ask for. You get what you measure. So academics historically have been evaluated on their research output and their teaching ability. I'm not in administration anymore, so maybe I've license to say this, that those were the primary contributions that determined your output or your success. Can I say that when I compare industry and academia, I've been 20 years in each. In industry, it was a lot more team focused. So you could reach a very high level in an organization, depending on how you enabled your team to be successful. Frankly, I haven't seen that same dynamic in academia. It's quite an individual endeavor. Now, I have many colleagues who are amazing team players and have done remarkable stuff in terms of collaboration. But generally speaking, it's a very it's an individual-based reward system rather than a team-based, and I think that's one thing I would like to see changed. In terms of the outreach or engagement, and we'll come on to this myself and Chiara, is that I think there can be a very transactional view of how you relate to organizations outside of the university. I'm going to go out, I'm going to grab the data, bring it back in, going to publish, and then we're done. I would advocate for a more relational rather than transactional approach. I think if you are going to build resilient relationships that will stand the test of time and true partnerships that will transcend any one individual, then you're in the space of creating that kind of relational discussion. And I haven't seen enough of that in universities, frankly, over the years. So I think there's much to do there, but on the positive side, I think there is a huge respect for universities as trusted partners in Ireland. I think we've the privilege of being highly regarded generally, I think, in terms of integrity, in terms of ability, in terms of engagement potential. But it's become quite a congested space as well. We're a small country, and I've just come back from a series of regional workshops in Dublin, Cork, Limerick, Galway, and one of the messages I'm getting back in terms of a pain point or a challenge in dealing with the tertiary system in general is that, hey, this is just too congested, too many actors here. I don't know how to channel, So there are challenges for sure, but I think we're not in a bad place. But the point I was trying to make earlier on about engagement and outreach is that we should be perhaps a bit more systematic in how we think of that, and a bit more self-aware about where we are in that spectrum of different types of projects, and how we can make processes repeatable and systematic, so that when I finish working with Chiara and her colleagues, that it won't matter, that I'll have inserted something that will be a good basis for my successor. I'm hoping that answers the question somewhat, Keith.
No, it does, Brian. Could I just ask one quick follow-on? I think you're absolutely right about the move from transactional to relational, and the question there is, I think, or one of the questions is, how do you demonstrate impact to the funders, to the political system, to industry? The transactional thing, we did 1 million, interactions with industry. How do you? I'd just be interested in your views on that, and then I'll shut up.
Okay, so I'm a qualitative researcher rather than a quantitative researcher, and I think that we've got to balance the balance isn't right at the moment. When I look at the evidence that's been used for policy development, it's almost all quant, and that's great. You absolutely have to have quantitative data. It's the basis for everything. You know, you can't move forward without quantitative analysis, but it needs to be complemented by qualitative analysis more. So, what I find is one of the tasks I did when I joined the group first was to trawl through all of the not all of them, but as much of the evidence as I could. And I saw lots of commentary on what's happening in Ireland around innovation. I didn't see much around why it's happening. So that's where the human factor and the human in the loop, or the qualitative analysis, where you sit down and you look somebody in the eye and you ask them, what's wrong here? Unless you do that kind of complementary qualitative analysis, I think it's going to end up being problematic ultimately, particularly when it comes to something like innovation, because ultimately innovation is a human endeavor, and it will be for the foreseeable future. So once you've got an activity that's based on human endeavor, to somehow not include that dialogue seems to me to be an oversight.
Sorry, thank you, Keith. I think your question's absolutely hitting the nail on the head. The incentive structures in universities are just not there to value, to support, to nurture impact-related work. It's seen as a supplementary sideshow or a nice addition, but fundamentally it's about scholarly work, about Google citations or Scopus citations, and so on. We don't put money into the system. In the UK, there's 100 million a year goes into universities, ring-fenced for impact research, and the subsequent year allocation from Research England is dependent on you demonstrating success. It grows or declines depending on your ability to, and that changes VCs' minds. VCs aren't ring-fencing money in the quantities we need to make a decisive step change, and they're not doing that because nationally the financial landscape isn't placing them in a position to make those kind of adjustments and the calibration of what matters and what doesn't. And as long as the VCs aren't sending a strong signal, financially supported out, members of staff in the universities are going to continue to see impact as something of a nice addition, as opposed to the fundamental reason for doing research in the first place. So I think it's a key question: why are universities unable to put the incentive structures in place to have a step change in the values attached to impactful research? On impact, we have some great work going on in the university on that. I don't know if Olga wants to speak about that in a second, but Chris and Frank, I think, want to come in. So maybe take a couple of questions and then we'll move on. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I'm Frank Geary. I'm the Director of Scholars at Risk Europe. So we're based here in Moosey, just across the corridor. My question is about the capacity for absorption that you mentioned among partners outside of the university. So my background is working with civil society organizations. So this is something I really, really recognize. I'm wondering, are there good examples that you could share of either mechanisms or practices coming from universities that are looking to address that capacity for absorption, or looking to, bypass or augment the capacity for absorption among partners?
I don't have good news there, Frank. So typically what I find is that, well, I'll talk about industry first. Ultimately, when industry want to add capacity, they either hire the person involved, get the the PhD graduate or the postdoc or whatever it is, so they physically assimilate the person into their organization. That's one way of increasing their ability to absorb those ideas. So either they hire the person, or else the idea has been so well codified. So if it's a well-structured patent, or if it's a very well described idea, then there might be some chance of capturing that explicit knowledge and making it tacit internally in an organization. So those are the challenges. One of the those are the mechanisms that companies use, I guess. I think the program that I'm engaged in, actually, and Seán as well, this idea of physically moving people from their organization and planting them physically, literally, in another organization is a good thing. So, as I said, I've just come from a meeting of different EU partners on this topic of innovation, and Ireland is fairly progressive and fairly unique in this program, as it turns out. So the idea of getting senior policymakers to come and live in academia for a time, I think it's been of terrific value to me personally, for as long as Seán's been here. I've learned a lot, and I'm hoping that Chiara and her colleagues will learn something from me as well. I hope I can make some modest contribution to what's going on there. So for all we say about, and I'm IT software kind of guy, about systems and technology and AI and all of that stuff, I think there's nothing to beat the physical interaction and the trust and relationship and bonding you build over time. So that mightn't be good news for you, Friday. Maybe not what you wanted to hear, but that's my take on it. Thank you.
Thanks. So pass the mouse back to Chris. Yes.
Thanks. And I'm just thinking what would happen if you put an industry person, scientist, into a university academic group. I think that would be a nice experience. But my question is about very specific about SFI, because it's an SFI research project.
Yeah.
You're part of an SFI funded research institute as well. I'm interested in SFI and this discussion going away from the research clusters period, which was very applied research, to the research centers, hopefully to become more expert, more more basic research nearly. And then this move that I try to understand, and your partner might have an idea, they moved from the Department of Jobs, because it was jobs and industry focused, to the Department of Education. So that's my understanding. It's not. Is it still an enterprise agency? And what does that mean really for the impact on? What was that actually driven by that they wanted the impact to move away from applied research to science, or maybe you have an idea about that?
Well, my colleagues in SFI would be more informed than I am, but the way I read it was over time move more towards a challenge-based model, and I think there's merit in that challenge-based view, that you rather than doing research for research's sake, that you can do excellent research, but it has some focus and it has some heft in terms of its relevance and its importance to Ireland. Now, I don't think the challenge-based system it's not a panacea for everything. For instance, I can't. Maybe somebody here can tell me the number one problem we have in the country is housing. Why isn't there an Institute of Housing? Anyway, so I think if we take
about a research prioritization exercise, they have a number of the specific rule, why did they actually move out of the Department of Jobs?
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question.
Can we take that separately, Chris? But actually, we have a whole session planned for the next seminar with Deirdre Lillis. She's coming out and she's going to do a seminar. She's the Assistant Secretary in Government in charge of research policy. So she'll be able to talk through any aspect of research policy, but obviously with the focus on research policy with us. So you're moving into a very broad section about why did the government decide things? And effectively it decided to bring together further and higher and wanted as much of research as possible, but some of the industry focused research has remained in the enterprise department. And then, but the SFI, which has now been amalgamated into Research Ireland by D. Ferris. So, but we can actually chat about that more in more detail when Deirdre's here. And colleagues from SFI or from Research Ireland here are more focused on the fellowships part. They don't have responsibility for that part, but we might bring them in later to talk about that. Do you want to add?
One last real detailed point about what would happen if you put an industry person in academia. So it is happening. So we're getting entrepreneurs and residents. I don't know if you know those guys. In Ireland, there are a number of entrepreneurs and residents in academia, and the idea is that through personal contact and mentorship and coaching, that some of their experience and ability would kind of rub off. So there is a model for that.
And we have quite a lot of examples, for example, in the Innovation Institute here of business, people from business background, and indeed quite a lot of academics who've come in from business, like yourself, Brian, who've had a career in business first. So, going to move on to the second part of the session, but I know we've got some comments coming in, and we'll try and take them as part of the second session. Particularly like the spinal tap reference, by the way, if you ever put that in. So some people have the volume turned up to 11. So, and I think that Anne has sorted the sound as best we can, and really appreciate all your help, Anne. We're really lucky here actually that we have Anne Hamilton Black, because we're able to do this stuff live, and it means that we've 3 times as many online as we have present, and it's actually a great way of reaching out, and people are across the country, to be honest, listening to this. In not saying it's number one that people are interested in, but at the same time, there's a widespread enough group that are engaging with this series. So I'm going to move on to the second part, and I gave Chiara a short introduction at the start, but I'm actually going to give you a longer introduction now, Chiara, if you don't mind. I'm not going to bother introducing Brian again. So Chiara is in this research for policy unit as assistant principal officer, which has been doing the lead work of advancing research for policy as a concept across the system. But what's unique about Chiara's role then is she really has responsibility within the Department of Further and Higher Education for research and policy for that department in further and higher education and the related areas. So people may not have noticed, but there's been a huge amount of really interesting work here that's come out over the last couple of years. Like data and research sources across a range of policies were published the summer before last for the first time ever by DFARS in a really coherent way. That was really, really interesting. In the last few months, Chiara has been the drafter on the call that went out to the whole academic community to ask everybody, are you interested in research on areas of interest to the department? And you're going through the responses to that call, but basically trying to do a trawl of what is out there, who's working on areas that are relevant to how the department works and the department's area of expertise. Really among the departments who are really trying to engage with the research community differently about their own area of responsibility. But obviously this is linked in with the overall responsibility for DFARS. So Chiara's been leading on that. And before she was with DFARS, she was in the Higher Education Authority. So she's great experience across the national system. So it's great that you're here with us, Chiara, and really appreciate it. And a regular visitor to Maynooth indeed. So it's great that you're here. So we're going to hand back to Chiara and Brian, who are going to talk about this research project, which has Brian seconded part-time into DFARS. So over to you.
Thanks so much, Seán, for the great introduction, and thanks also to Mark for organizing this series. So I'm very flattered to be here today. I think that I've got the nicest introduction ever from Seán. It was quite nice to hear it. And also in my previous life, I used to be a researcher. So being here today is nice, not only professionally, but also personally, since I'm kind of closing the circle all over. And in this presentation that I promise I'll be brief, we will actually touch upon some things that we discussed. I think that Brian concluded saying that he hopes that we learned something from him. Yes, we did, and we will talk about it. Then there was a conversation also with kids about impact, and we'll discuss about that. I'm afraid in the challenges part, maybe it could be also an opportunity. And then there will be something about the relationship with policymakers, how to transform it into a relationship, and we will discuss it, how to do it from the very beginning. So to start, and I know that this is a seminar series, so I won't give you context that you may be aware of. We're a young department set up in 2020, and the evidence for policy was set up in 2022, and we're growing since then. We have two main functions. One is in the policy space, and it is research for policy, and it is led by my colleague Leonora Hardy. And then we have a support function, and it is supporting the policy units by providing research data. I see my colleague John Byrne, who looks after data here, and also providing evaluation. As Seán mentioned, I look up after the research bit. Supporting the units can take different shape and form. One thing is supporting them with ad hoc needs. If they need help with something, our door is always open. Another way we do it, we initiate programs looking at things that may be relevant to a number of units, a number of divisions, but not specific to any of them. And since we are a bit removed from the policy space, we can try to look at the big picture and try to join the dots. So definitely, like this project with Brian is about initiating something and try to share that with the policy units here in the department. So co-design and flexibility. To talk about that, I want to go back to the time that we got involved into this scheme. And by the way, full disclosure, I wasn't there at the time. It was my principal officer, Trudy Duffy, who wrote the call. I think at this point, many of you are familiar with the SFI in public sector fellowship scheme. Now it's probably called like a Research Ireland scheme. But anyway, it is basically a scheme that allows researchers to be seconded into departments or public sector organizations. And in a nutshell, it involves a department that publishes a research project, a researcher that applies for that, and after a recruitment process, if everything goes well, the researcher is placed into the institution. So at the time of submitting our project, there was something that we were quite clear about, and it was our objective, assessing the impact of the tertiary system on innovation in the workplace. So by tertiary system, we can mean the post-secondary education in its totality, further education, higher education, research, and so on. And to date, we have solid evidence that research patenting is related to innovation. We have solid body of research. About the rest of the tertiary, I think we all have a good story about someone that took a course, learned something, brought back the knowledge into the workplace, and there was innovation. Or about a company that somehow engaged with apprenticeship, and it was really great, transformative, innovative. But our problem with that is that we don't go that far beyond the anecdotal stage. Like, we know all these nice stories, but we don't have a more organized conceptual category for that. So this is why we really wanted to go out to the system and recruit expert researchers like Brian to help us to solve this problem. And in terms of this objective, we were quite clear about that. For us, it was like what we wanted to do wasn't really negotiable. What was fully negotiable for us was the how part, the methodology, the timeline, exact outputs, stakeholders to involve. And not because we were clueless or we wanted some extra handholding, but because our interpretation of the scheme, this secondment scheme, is that it is an exchange. So it is completely outside the usual consultancy logics where you source a piece of work and you really want what you ask for. But we thought more about co-designing things, so exchanging ideas, skills, knowledge, and so on. I think that this open mindset came very handy at recruitment stage. I remember the day of the interview that we had 2 candidates. One candidate was Brian, that came with a project about hitting the road, talking to employers, and so on. Very qualitative. I won't say anything more since I may spoil what is coming next. And then there was Dr. Krishna Vadlamannati from UCD, that he also came in with a great idea that was about big numbers, data, running regression, hardcore data. And we were really sad that we had to pick one of them, since we immediately saw the complementarity of these two different approaches. The SFI Research Ireland was absolutely brilliant, and they made an exception for us, and we ended up having the two of them with us. I think in that circumstance, we were incredibly lucky. You don't get a Brian and a Krishna every day, so get good luck. But also I think that our open mind really helped us to seize a good opportunity when it came. This is my last slide, so you won't have to bear with me much longer. And it goes back to the initial point that I've made about me doing research and channeling that to the policy units, but not doing policy myself. So basically, we felt that a big risk of this project was to have two researchers doing something very nice and very powerful that then is disseminated. It is disseminated to the policy units, but the time is not right, and so the impact is limited. So we felt that best thing for us was try to blur the lines between researching and disseminating. In other words, we wanted everyone to be involved from day one. So when they started, first we organized meetings with assistant secretary generals and with stakeholders out in the system, like our agencies, Enterprise Ireland, and so on. And the other thing that we did, we included continuous engagement with the policy units in the governance structure. So you can see that there is me as the PM, the project manager of the project, and then the fellows doing the research. And then you can see that we set up a steering board composed of the principal officers of the different units involved that convened every 3 months. These the units involved, they came from different divisions, first education, higher ed, research. I mean, if you think about the topic, there is something in for everyone. So it was important that people from the different side of the house could hear what happened. And these steering board meetings, they were an opportunity for the policy units to give continuous steer to the project, and also to give some feedback, some advice in real time, ensuring policy relevance of the project as it evolved. It is also a good way to inform them about research findings, including early research findings, as the project developed, as opposed to then sharing everything at the end as a big surprise. So what we hope to have created is a sort of cycle where dissemination, advice, and building relationships is something that happens together rather than be all scattered all over the place. So you have heard enough from me. I'm handing over to Brian.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Thanks very much, Chiara. So I saw the call from SFI, and when I read the call, it was all about innovation, and I've been involved in innovation in one form or other for a long time. So it seemed to be a good fit. And the more I started to think about it, the more I liked the idea of working with a new set of colleagues, a new ecosystem, if you want to use that word. And as I said at the outset, I'm a little bit of an outlier, I suspect, in the program. I've been around for a while, and I felt that I've seen a lot of innovation projects and strategies not go well. I've seen some flourish, but my motivation, I suppose, for getting involved in this is to see if I could bring some of my learning to bear on the topic. So the nuts and bolts of the thing really is the resources are. I decided to spend 50% of my time in one foot in Differs and one foot in Maynooth. And that was a conscious thing. And I'm glad I did it in hindsight. And I'm glad I got good advice about whether to do it or not, because what I find is that it's really helpful to have a sounding board here in the university about what I'm doing, and also to have that kind of dialogue going on in the Ferris as well. I mean, it wouldn't suit everyone. Maybe some people would just like to lock, stock, and barrel, just check out, leave university, and be 100% in the public in the department. I guess it's partly a personal thing, kind of a style thing, but I've found it beneficial to keep both doors open, so to speak. So I have my PhD students, I have my teaching, I have the things that I normally do in the university, and also this work in the Ferris. So, you know, the structure when I look at that, it looks very structured, and I don't want to give the impression that this is a very rigid, inflexible, kind of antiseptic view of the activity. The richness and the benefits are in the conversations around the structure, but I found the structure works pretty well. It's clear enough to help create a forward momentum for the project, but it's ambiguous enough that you can experiment around the edges. So the structure has been working for me. Project area then, this was of course music to my ears at the time, how to look at the impact of any system on innovation, and in particularly those three last points, the last 2 points, what's the perception among the stakeholders, and what are the pain points? So that plays to my bias, I suppose, to engaging with the humans in the process and understanding at a visceral level even what their experiences with the system have been. So I put my hand up and said, yeah, I'll get in the car and I'll organize some regional focus groups on the topic, and that's what I did. So that's the structure overall, the project and the scope of the project. So from an academic point of view, what are my reflections? I'm about 7 months in, 7 or 8 months in. I think the opportunities are so far really, really interesting. You get an opportunity to contribute to the life cycle of policy development, so you really can see, soup to nuts, if you like, or creation, capture, simulation, application. You can get a really good view of the overall life cycle. I chose to do field work rather than desk-based, so that suited me. And you get invited to participate in very interesting conversations and discussions at the local level, at the regional level, international level. So it opened up a whole set of conversations that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And I have to say, and it's not me being anything other than very honest, is that there's a refreshing attitude in the group that I'm in, at least around surfacing in a very open and frank and honest way where the bad points as well as the good points in existing internal processes are. And the final point is what Woody Allen said, 90% of life is turning up, right? So just being there means that opportunities will appear that you hadn't anticipated. So in January, I'm going to start working on another project that I hadn't anticipated. That is going to be fascinating, very interesting. Wouldn't have had an opportunity to participate in that if I hadn't been a fellow in this project. Now, of course, it's not all great. There are challenges. I was a civil servant in a previous century, and there are rigidities in the system, work practices, processes, and quite rightly so. This is public money we're using after all. So there's all of that type of bureaucratic stuff. But you know what? You just kind of get over yourself and get on with it. And even though it's a challenge to work with, I haven't found it an insurmountable challenge. Part of the issue is just different time constants, different rhythms. So industry is a particular rhythm. My first slide, when I talked about academia having a particular rhythm, and the workplace in the public service services also has a rhythm to it in terms of how things happen. Yeah, I guess my comment would be that it's. I hope this is fair. It's very hard to get things started, but then once they're started, it's impossible to stop them. That's my takeaway. So there can be difficult to. You arrive at a department, full of deep expertise and a very broad and rich and deep understanding of the domain. But carving out a unique contribution for yourself and saying, okay, this is where I'm going to make an intervention, and that intervention is going to be something that I will be proud of, and that will reflect my competencies and my interests. That's not a trivial thing, actually. So carving out that unique contribution space for yourself can take time. Just my comment to Keith earlier on. Some researchers can have a somewhat transactional approach here. We might have a journal article in mind, or they want to hit a particular academic outlet, and grab the data that you need to make that academic contribution. Get in, get out, and get done with it. That's never been my modus operandi. I suppose I've always tried to build working relationships that are resilient. Having said that, that's not an easy thing to do. So it can be challenging. So those are my kind of academic point of view comments, Chiara.
So I think that my own point of view is that in terms of opportunities, something bigger is building ties with institution. Today, I'm in Maynooth doing this talk. It would have never happened if we weren't involved in this type of program. I went to Brian's workshops. I met his partners. I already came here a couple of times here in Maynooth. So there has been a network that came up as a result of that same thing with UCD. Now we know Krishna. We know that we can tap into his network. So we just got connections that weren't there before. Also, I think that it forced us to get out of the box. So we were worried about, channeling knowledge to the policy units. And this is how we came up with the idea of a governance system that involved that. I don't want to say that is the perfect solution. We have already put in our terms of reference that we review everything halfway through, and in the end, we may do something different at some point. But I think that starting is always the first step. Things can be also improved, reviewed, and so on, but you need a starting point. Also, gain first-hand experience of cooperation with researchers. We really felt that we had research in our name, but we had a limited knowledge of what researchers do in fields that are relevant to us. And again, we are a new department, so things happen. We need just a bit of time. I think that it has been transformative to get a better understanding through this program. And tap into scholarly knowledge. I was at the Brian workshops, as I mentioned. I think that I got a master class in facilitation techniques and stakeholders engagement. There was Krishna that not only he did some amazing work with data and so on, but he helped out some people in our unit at the time of need. So we really felt that there was knowledge exchange well beyond what you can see in a publication. And again, learn it by doing it. When we started, we weren't even sure how to do like a secondment agreement. We had to borrow the documents from a unit that did it. Like in the first edition of the call. So it was really a steep learning curve, but we feel that if the call was relaunched tomorrow, we would be in a much better place. So there wasn't a lot of institutional knowledge gain. Challenges, I mean, Brian mentioned that the civil service is a rigid place. Of course, you need to be flexible in your mind. Like you cannot just think with the traditional line management logics. It just doesn't work here. So I think that we needed to think the relationship, like using things that don't really apply to the civil service. If we had stuck to the traditional model, we would have got lower. And giving fair exposure to policymakers, we had like a midterm review, and something that we realized is that in spite of our best try, it would have been nice to give the fellows better exposure to the work of the department. I think here the challenge is that we're all getting used to the post-COVID world, like they mostly work remotely. We mostly work remotely. I work remotely 60% of my time. So I think that even the benefits of the secondment in this new context, I think is something that needs to be worked out. We're probably working on many other things at the same time. I'd say it's something to keep up on the back of our mind as a lesson learned. And also ensuring research impact in the department. And it's funny that it was something that was mentioned. Of course, we built structures that we hope that they will enhance the impact of this research project to the departmental policy making. Would that work? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. So I think that we are trying things out, but we don't know how it will work, how much it will work. And as Brian discussed, it will be mostly some qualitative assessment of impact. We won't have hard numbers, like 5 publications, 8 policy briefs. So this is something that we need to think about. And that is over to you.
Next.
Yes, I was up next. My fault. Anyway, key takeaways: be ready to take on board the input of top experts. That goes back to the point about flexibility. Is not outsourcing to consultant. If you really hope to have a piece of work done as you want, you may consider another scheme. But I think that the public sector fellowship scheme is about exchanging ideas. And also, whenever possible, bring co-creation and dissemination together. We tried the governance system. I'm sure there are many other approaches out there, but I would say don't leave dissemination to the policy unit as an afterthought or as something to be done once that the research is done. Build bridges. What we did at the beginning were facilitating meetings with assistant secretary generals, agencies, and so on. And both Brian and Krishna found that valuable. So I would say try to open door. I think this is where the value is. And learn in the process. Again, I took many master classes, being part of that. And what I really want to do is to make sure that this institutional knowledge doesn't get lost the moment that I move, but rather it is helpful to grow the unit and grow the department. And then be open to criticism. We had some issues with data access. I mentioned before the issue with exposure to policymaking activities. Like you won't get it right the first time around. It is fine. Some things can be fixed, some cannot. But it is good to understand that everything can be improved. That's it. Really over to you.
Thanks, Chiara. So my takeaways or comments?
You want to watch the mic again?
Sorry, thank you. And of course, these are all highly contingent on where you are in your career, where you are in life. So for me, the things that I wanted to emphasize, and I've already done some of this, this business of relational rather than a transactional approach. I think you should keep the long game in mind, okay, it's a project that you have to deliver on, and you've got timescales associated with the project and expectations that need to be met, and that's all fine and dandy. But I think if you just focus on the short-term deliverables, you may be missing an opportunity. The other point is about trying to make an intervention that's systemic rather than tactical or episodic, you know. So you'd like to, at least I'd like to think that at the end of the fellowship, I will have had some modest contribution that will be in place for my successor and that he or she can leverage. Keep a foot in both camps. That worked for me. I've always been a believer in research-informed teaching and this kind of connection between what you do in the classroom and what you do with your field work. So it works for me. I like that, and I wouldn't like to break it. So that's partly why I went with the 50-50 model. In innovation, we talk about innovation adjacencies. This is where you do something innovative, but there may be other opportunities to apply that idea or to apply another idea. So my point here is that not to be kind of too overly focused on the narrow project that you may be working on, and to be alive to the possibility of leveraging other opportunities that come up. And that's already happened in my case. Yeah, and lastly, this should be a bit of fun as well, right? And it should be interesting, and it should be engaging and energetic. So there's opportunities here to have a whole new set of interesting engagements and dialogues with people with deep expertise in areas that are emerging that might be of interest to you. So grab the opportunity, I would suggest, to have those conversations, because my colleagues in DeFerris certainly make those opportunities available to you if you want to.
Okay, and thanks very much. We give you the clap. That's really interesting and unique indeed. Chiara, your honesty that you came in after the idea was developed, but obviously you've run with the idea and enabled the idea. And Brian turning up, being there and getting over yourself, and then being flexible together. It's kind of a simple enough message, but a whole lot of complexity in it. There's a few comments online, but I want to actually open it up to the floor. I'm going to open it up to Jenny Stevens. Okay.
Thank you very much. Very interesting discussion. My name is Jenny Stevens. I'm a professor of climate justice here at Maynooth University in the Icarus Climate Research Center. And I want to bring in the tension between the public good and private sector interests, and how universities are increasingly being, I would say, used by private sector interests to advance profit-seeking motives. And you know, I do research on the influence of the fossil fuel industry on climate and energy research in universities, and the evidence is very clear that they have been strategically investing in universities for decades to impact policy by slowing down and reducing transformative climate policy. So my question, I guess, is how do you all think about, you know, the private sector partnerships can actually be used very strategically to influence policy in ways that are against the public good, and is really for profit-seeking private sector interests and industry? You know, often I'm recently returned back to Ireland, and I'm quite surprised by how private sector partnerships are required and, you know, kind of fundamental to so much of the academic research, that it skews the whole research landscape toward private sector interests and away from the public good, I would say. So I guess I'm curious how you would think about that in this space. And then I had a second question, which was kind of a provocative in a different way, thinking about, you know, the whole department is called innovation, your whole focus on innovation. One of the things in the climate, again, in climate energy that people are starting to talk about more is exnovation, right? And you mentioned getting stuck. We're stuck in these systems and structures that are not helping us, right? And we just keep doing them. So I was curious how and whether and if kind of focusing on research on exnovation, how to stop doing the things that we know are hurting society, can be coupled and integrated into the more mainstream focus always on innovation, which assumes that the new innovative ideas will displace the old, but what we're finding is oftentimes it doesn't, right? We can just have, like with fossil fuels, we have renewable energy, but fossil fuel extraction and exploration is actually going up, and fossil fuel companies are making more money than they ever have, despite all the climate and energy research that we've been doing for 30 years. So two kind of provocative questions, and I'd love to get insights on those. Thank you.
Sure. I go ahead? Okay. So the first question is a really important one. So on the fossil fuel issue in particular, Norway have just gone through the Norwegian government and the Norwegian university system have gone through the process of developing a whole set of principles and academic integrity recommendations based on their experience with fossil fuel. I won't say emphasis or influence by fossil fuel companies. So I think the question you raise is a very good one. However, I would say that it's not a new one in the sense of ethics, academic integrity, how responsible innovation is conducted. That topic has been around for quite some time. What seems to me to be lacking at a national level is a clear set of principles and guidelines, and that's why I threw up the Danish example. You know, what are the principles by which we stand or fall in terms of our academic integrity and in terms of how we conduct our business? And how are we being held to account to apply those principles? Sometimes I think that universities can be a little bit kind of talking out of both sides of our mouth in the sense that we say to early career researchers, if you want to get promoted, you got to generate lots of research income, you got to do lots of this engagement stuff, you got to, you know, accept that invitation to go to China to give a talk in Hawaii or something, or you've got to go to Israel and give a. So we encourage that kind of engagement at one level, and then when it actually happens, we say, "We did what?" You know, and how, you know, we can be a little bit. It can be mixed signals sometimes. I think so. My answer to your first question is, it's a problem. It's not a new problem, but I think we could do with some thinking around the clarity of the principles that we apply, particularly as the technology moves on and as we, in the middle of the AI period and so on, there's a whole new set of ethical issues around that. The second, can you remind me what the second question was again? Oh yeah. So that Nature article I mentioned, it was making the point that all of that, whatever, 30 million papers that they analyzed, that was the conclusions that drew from that is that academics are becoming less disruptive, that our ideas are more incremental, and we're not creating the breakthroughs in academia, in academic research that we did historically. And the conclusions that we're drawing was that it had to do with a very narrowing of the research focus. So people are getting narrower and narrower and deeper, and not crossing domains enough. And intuitively, I think there's some logic to that. Actually, I do have a sense that a lot of academics, frankly, are on a treadmill. You know, they're struggling to, or we're struggling to get those papers out, do your service for the university, do the teaching, and it's a tough gig to be a successful researcher these days. There's one slight anecdote I'll throw in. Has anybody here ever heard of the Hare's Corner? Right. In agriculture in Ireland, farmers used to keep a corner of their field that they used to let it run wild. It wasn't overly cultivated, and the idea was that there was value in having a very biodiverse part of your land. And that idea has been captured. So there's music now, an album called Hare's Corner. There's a whole movement in Ireland in the agricultural community about biodiversity that talks to this notion of you have to get off the treadmill, if you like, and allow one corner of your land to grow organically. Sometimes I think universities need an academic Hare's Corner. You know, somewhere that we can go and in a very unfettered, unconstrained way, have those types of destructive ideas, those types of disruptive thoughts in a very collegiate and interdisciplinary way. Yeah, that's my vote, is that universities should have a Hare's Corner for ideas.
Okay, thanks. Hopefully we're helping create that Hare's Corner with some of these ideas. I was just going to add, without directly answering the question, and just first of all, it's great that Jenny's here, and she's been here a few months, and I was in this room just under a year ago when she told a number of people here that she was coming, and everybody was thrilled to bits, and it's great that you're here, and the work you're doing on the Futures Institute in Climate to establish that is really, really important, and will help Maynooth make an impact in that regard to enhanced extent. As part of the series, we're actually in the Department of Environment have agreed to come and have a chat with us next year and about what they're doing. But just to say in summary, and it's not so much for Jenny because you know this, but for others, that they have been to the lead in organising themselves for research for policy. They've published a research strategy. They're trying to evolve researchers in different ways. And I think it's really important that the state, who's responsible for society, if you like, as a whole, pulls together the research in an area and is the one to make those judgments. And they're trying to build a more coherent research framework for this area. And the issues that Jenny has raised are really, really key issues in that regard. And I think that the role that they've been taking, and we hope when they're here to have a couple of researchers from here joining the panel with them. And obviously I've got some ideas on that now, but I had that idea already. Okay, so that's really, really helpful. Anybody else want to come in from the floor? Yeah, sorry. Teresa. So Teresa's in Research Ireland on this fellowship scheme, running this scheme.
Thanks very much. And I just wanted to make a quick comment on the programme, just so people aren't aware of it. So myself and my colleague Laura Quinn, who's here today, we managed what was SFI, now Research Ireland Public Service Fellowship Programme. So the programme was launched in 2019. We've run 2 calls so far. And to date, we've placed 26 researchers, both faculty and postdoctoral, across 13 government departments and agencies, and including also the Oireachtas Library and Research Service. So Brian is one of our 2023 cohort, and we're delighted to have him on board, and also his colleague Louise Connell, who spoke here a couple of weeks ago as well. I just want to make a comment, actually, just coming back to Chiara about the remote working, and also it touches on Brian about the relational rather transactional links. When this call was first launched, it was pre-COVID, and the expectation had been that secondments would take place where researchers would essentially spend their full time 5 days a week in the department. COVID hit and those went all remote. So when the 2023 call came out, we went with remote working because we wanted to open this up to researchers that may not be based in Dublin, for example, whereas a lot of the government departments and agencies are. So in 2023, we offered 42 projects across 18 government departments and agencies. And a number of them were also regionally based as well. So I guess it's just more of a comment, maybe more than a question, but in terms of those relational links and that serendipity that can come out, we're trying to make the secondments as attractive to researchers as possible, because we really want more researchers in this space. But it is that balance between the remote working, which can make it attractive to researchers who may not live very close to the department, and also trying to embed the researcher in there. I don't know if you have any further comment on how we could potentially do that, Brian, in terms of it's not something we mandate as part of the programme in terms of how remote that is or how in the office that is. That's part of this comment agreement that Chiara talked about. But I think it's a really interesting comment for us as well, and thinking about future calls as well in terms of making sure that embedding really does happen and is not just kind of a tick the box thing on it. Yeah, thank you.
Just to clarify, we also work, like, I think something that adds complexities to that is that we also work remotely. So
Yes.
even if someone was mandated to come 5 days per week, they could feel very alone sometimes.
And Brian, do you want to comment?
Nothing else than what I said earlier on, that there is no substitute for physical connection, going in and having a coffee, shooting the breeze, and having those types of unstructured conversations. It just doesn't work over Zoom or Teams. You can report on the project, you can fulfill the project charter needs online, but you really need to connect socially.
Okay.
Thank you. Just like, there's another scheme coming up soon.
It's not in our annual plan as yet, but yes, we absolutely.
Just in case people didn't hear, sorry, I need my, there are plans for another one, but it's not formal yet. Yeah, okay.
Wonderful. Okay, a couple of questions online, then we'll begin to wind down. I know people are one eye on lunch. John O'Connor, thanks, John, for your question. Talking about evaluation of the scheme, what works, how will we know if it's been successful or not? So any evaluation of the scheme planned and works? Will the results of the survey sent to academics, asked Dorothy Stewart, research ideas be made available? So presumably this is the researchers suggesting potential areas of research they might be interested, as well as the department suggesting the Dorothy, I think, is presuming there's been a survey and that you're gathering up ideas now for research priorities for academics as well as for departments. So if that is the case, will that summation of what academics think of the research priorities be made available? And finally, Rory is asking the question about implementation, and we've talked about this in other contexts. A lot of this is about producing research, getting research into policy communities, and then the fellowship finishes. Is there plans to, or legacy surplus funds or whatever, to make sure that actually the really hard work, as we call it, final last marathon, not the final last mile, of getting the actual ideas translated into practice, is shepherded through by the fellow and the partner as well? And do you feel that in your case that has been a challenge? You've taken it so far, and then the fellowship will finish, and the really hard work really is now taking that stage and moving it forward, and yet there's no through process. So question about implementation and how far you can go to actually enact some of the great ideas you've been producing.
That's right, Chiara.
Was the question about the publication of the research areas related to the call for evidence. So we received the submission, we are analyzing them, and I think we will announce plans in the forthcoming future. I don't want to commit now to anything specific, but definitely we're reviewing everything with the utmost attention. That is about that. In terms of what happens when the fellow finish, I think actually there is a benefit in the online world, because I think that if the secondment is 100% physical, then when they're gone, they're gone. Well, I think that in this world where many activities take place online, it's so much easier to invite them for an online webinar or ask them to come half day for something. So for instance, Krishna has finished in these days, but of course he will present at some meetings, so we plan to involve him for other things. So it's not that once they leave, they're dead to us. Again, this is all about dissemination. By dissemination, I mean the proactive effort of channeling research findings. Are they taken on board? Ask me in 2 years' time. I mean, it's just it's just something that we will see and review. And anything else? Was there anything else?
One of the reasons that I went for a 2-year rather than a 6-month activity was the hope that I would be involved in implementation as well as creating some of these ideas. So that's my hope. We'll see if it pans out. But I think there's value in having that kind of longitudinal perspective, as well as the smash and grab, kind of get in, get out quickly kind of thing.
I mean, it might be, for the SFI, the other schemes that SFI run to maybe have some follow on the top 3 high potential, transformative, generational projects that come from this, then can enter a competitive bid for other funds, because I think dissipating the energy that's been created across the board as schemes stop and people move on to other things would be a tremendous shame. So anyway, yeah, thank you, Brian.
Yeah, I just want to talk about impact and implementation a small bit. Again, in the last week, the Department of Agriculture have published a report on research funded by it and its agencies over a 4 or 5 year period, up to about research that was awarded up to about 5 years ago. Now that it's completed, what difference has it made and what's the impact? And I think that's a really interesting thing to do, and something that would be sort of a possible reflection for other departments, but for research funders generally. I think that going to the government side, if you like, I think we've an implementation challenge. We're great about getting ideas. We're great, and we're improving the getting ideas. But can we get the ideas? Can we mix them, get them to something, and then can we help it be implemented? And I think we're in an election phase at the moment, and there's discussion around some of those type of topics at the moment around implementation. But how research and research engagement can help with implementation is so. We have one brokerage body, the Centre for Effective Services, which is involved in a really effective way, I think, in a small part of the overall field, and to do a third. We're going to do a session with them as well in the next round. But that getting into implementation, and it's about the complexities of implementation are just something that I think are really, really important. And most times you get people around the table that just have all these ideas, but it's actually getting into the implementation and the science of implementation. So there's a number of new areas, and that's really, really important. Was there somebody coming in there?
No, we have an expert in the room on that.
Okay.
Maybe you want to say about the implementation, how critical a part of the process it is.
Sure, thank you. David Krill, Director of Implementation Practice at Centre for Effective Services. And it's just interesting to hear the phrase ex-novation. For me, it's de-implementation, which happens to be my particular kind of interest. And I come from the health system. They don't like that word because it affects. And the question about implementation and de-implementation is, it's not just the mechanics of trying to substitute a new
Thanks, everyone.
Like one quick comment.
Sure.
I think sometimes we in Ireland we have this kind of bifurcation between creativity and innovation. We've got one department responsible for innovation and another department responsible for creativity. So I worked in organizations that had loads of good ideas, creative process, fantastic, but they were really bad at implementation. They didn't innovate. Creativity is about having ideas, innovation is about making them work. So I've worked in organizations that were really strong in terms of ideation and creativity, really bad. And similarly, I've worked in companies that have been very operational, really mechanical, but they had no ideas. So they had no ideas of their own. So it's seeing that continuum and getting it right, having the innovative original ideas, but then implementation in a multidisciplinary way, getting that combo, that's the hard part.
Okay, I'm going to move to finish off. So just before we conclude, Mark just wants us to have a few short reflections.
I don't do short, Seán.
I was been hopeful.
I was going to do this in the Woody Allen style. You mentioned Woody Allen. I can, agitated, nervous, existential meltdowns. Well, okay, very briefly then, which is not my style at all. But anyway, that was wonderful. I really love the scheme. The scheme clearly is going to continue. This is the best way of doing it. It's so direct and so the exchange is absolutely clear in terms of building brokering. The brokering is in the actual nature of the scheme. I think the thoughtfulness, this has been one of the more thoughtful sessions in terms of reflecting on the practice. And I think that's where we're at the moment. There's lots of study about how, research into policy, but then there's the study of the processes of translating research into policy as itself as an intellectual project to try to understand how that process works, how those systems work. And as Brian says, there's a lot on that. There's a lot, Brian, you gave us to think about today, alongside Chiara's experience of being on the other side of that. So those thoughtful contributions, I think, are good. You spoke about the 4th generation university, which I thought was very interesting. I think that's something that we should think about. You talked about mission-driven public policy, which is the big thing of today. I forget her name, Mariana Mazzucato. Everyone's talking about Mariana, including Mariana. Can't stop talking about Mariana. But this mission-driven public policy, very particular way of delivering, and the implications of that are huge, because if that's the style of policy making, then obviously the research supports that surround that would be different from other more incremental styles of policy delivery. I see a lot of these professionalised people going about at the moment, and it leads me to be a wee bit suspicious. The Richard Florida types of old, the Katie Raworths and the Mazzucatis and the Jeff Mulligan, who I think is a stronger person on this, but we want to professionalize this area, but we don't want to have the kind of celebrity gurus traveling around at great expense giving us advice, and we certainly don't want to institutionalize it to the point where it becomes fossilized and stale. So we definitely need to scale up and professionalize, but we've got lots of energies and loose strands and so on that are productively sitting in tension at the moment. I think that energy is good not to stifle by overly bureaucratizing. That said, I do think, going back to Keith's question, the civil service is getting its act squared in the Civil Service Research Network. Are the universities in Ireland getting their act squared? Well, arguably we shouldn't be getting our act squared separately from the civil services, but nonetheless, given the divisions and structures, it's incumbent on us to get ourselves into a position to be able to engage. We're nowhere near in a position. Each university is now starting to try to turn our attention. The sector through the IUA is turning its attention. So there's a lot of kind of goodwill there. But it's back to what Keith says, the inertia, the institutional limitations, the VC priorities, the incentive structures within universities. Getting £5 for a cup of coffee in a meeting is extraordinary, pushing water up a hill. So the kind of scale of investment, I think VP research people and VC president level people have no clue about the scale of the investment needed to do something meaningful and transformative in this space. And so we'll nurse on with some, as best we can with limited resources and so on, but it's so under-resourced and under-invested in. This is something we're trying to do in spite of the system, not in support or being supported by the system. And I think we need to have a serious look at that. The final point I want to make, Brian's raised this issue before. This is a wee bit Woody Allen. This is a wee bit philosophical. So apologies. Well, I'm not really sorry. It's just for my benefit rather than. But Brian talked about the system's been different right at the start, and this is something we come back to time and time again. You used the word currency, different vocabularies, different logics, different legacy. Between industry, the private sector, public sector, public policy, universities, and there's no doubt that kind of illiteracy or inability to operate across competing linguistic traditions, semantic traditions, different economic incentive structures, and so very, very difficult. And to the point that at times these collaborations appear to be ships passing in the night. We're all talking about the same thing, but we're not actually talking about the same thing. So we had recent experience of talking about making Dublin city centre safe. And what we meant by that as researchers was different from what the community meant. The same problem, same public problem, but what policymakers were thinking about, because the literacy is around rendering that public problem intelligible as a public problem, were so varied. It was like somebody speaking Spanish, German, and English, trying to have a conversation in Chinese. No, that wasn't that difficult. But I wanted to finish off. There's a philosophical concept about called boundary objects. Susan Starr and James Griesmer introduced this in 1989, and I think this is a really helpful concept. The concept of boundary objects to overcome this translational problem. And I'll just finish with this quote from them. It says, boundary objects are objects which are both plastic enough to adapt to local needs and constraints of the several parties employing them, yet robust enough to maintain a common identity across sites. They are boundary objects in that they are weakly structured in common use, and they become strongly structured in individual site use. They may be abstract or concrete, they have different meanings in different social worlds, but their structure is common enough to more than one world to make them recognizable as a means of translation. And this is the key thing for me, the bit of work I don't think we do enough. I think we muscle on and, try and coexist, and at times we're on the same page and then the picture gets bloody again and we move off. So that kind of struggling on, nursing on, hoping that we're all going, thinking together, but at times it's much more polyvocal than a single understanding of the problem. They say the creation and management of boundary objects is key in developing and maintaining coherence across intersecting social worlds. So the problem we had was we maybe should have just had a session saying, well, actually, before we start thinking about how to solve making Dublin city centre safe, are we all agreed what that problem is? What is the actual thing we're talking about here? Can we have a boundary object at least is stable enough, even though it has to be plastic because it's cannibalized by different people for different purposes? But is it common enough? Can we have a common enough object of discussion to make multiple contributions coalesce in a way which overlaps and reinforces each other, as opposed to, slipping past each other and us really thinking we're communicating, but actually we're just ships passing each other in a different orbit, occasionally interacting with each other, but in fact, not having any total effect or any takeaway effect, because at the end of the day, everyone is actually seeing the problem with a different line of sight, to the point that actually communication across those traditions is incommensurable. So boundary objects, and actually taking them seriously, the production of boundary objects is a prerequisite. And agreeing those, I think it's quite an interesting phenomenon. Seán probably hates that idea, but nonetheless, I thought I'll take the advantage of having the floor, Seán. So my apologies. But can I finish just by thanking Brian and Chiara before Seán rips the microphone off me? I said just thank you very much. Wonderful.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Our online attendance has significantly declined, but everybody here is far too polite. I find it very interesting, of course. So our orbits do pass quite a lot, and we actually orbit each other.
Jenny, if you didn't find it interesting, I'm in trouble.
I think we're really lucky that this pair have come into our orbit, and really lucky that the Ferris took the initiative to do this, and that Brian has undertaken it in a different way. And the preparation you undertook for this seminar has been really helpful, because it's helped bring up the sort of strategic issues in a really good way. So look, just really want to say thanks to the pair of you on all of our behalves. Two things to mention. The EPA have put up, Dorothy Stewart has put up an EPA implementation report in the chat, which just on the theme we're talking about. And we have another one of these events on Wednesday the 27th, just under 2 weeks, with Trevor Hall, who has been from here but is now working in the Department of Public Expenditure, NDP Delivery and Reform. This has been a bit longer because we wanted to incorporate the different bit with Brian into it as well. But look, we really do appreciate everybody sticking with it, and we hope to see you again. Much appreciated. All right, thanks for that.